Hello my guys from beautiful Medellin, Colombia. Just a real quick video. I met a few people on this trip, as usual, other travelers who asked me a lot of questions about how I did what I did. And I just want to summarize it because for somebody who's not into the real estate industry, it might be a little bit confusing of what takes place, how do you find the hard money lender, what's a hard money lender, so on and so forth. So in the next 5 minutes, I'm just going to explain how can you buy a property with the catchy phrase no money down, which sometimes end up with really no money down, sometimes ends up with you actually making money to have a property. Sometimes, in my case, which I'm going to show, ends up with $1,500 out of pocket to buy a $300,000 duplex, which is great. I'm going to guide you to 3 individual examples that start with the very basic, that is not very realistic, something in the middle that is more realistic, but it's more complicated in terms of the example, and finally, I'll give you an example that is the most complicated, but is actually how the deal is done is the most realistic one. So first things first, to get that strategy going, you need to find a property that is a good deal. I'm going to use just generalized numbers for easier example. Let's say you find a house that is worth $300,000. That's the worth of the house. That's not the price that you pay. Now, you don't have any money, but let's say you have a good credit score. You have to have something, okay? I don't know how to do it without a good credit score, to be honest. So, the first example is going to be oversimplified, and then the second I'm going to go in more detail. Let's say you somehow manage to strike a contract for the house for $220,000. The lender says, hey, we know each other for a while, we worked with you for a while, I'll finance 100% of the deal. Let's say that property does not need any renovations. So you go to the lender, he buys it for $220,000, and you write a promissory note, or you write whatever the documentation is called in your area, that you owe him $220,000. After 6 months, you go to the bank and refinance. Why 6 months? Because that's called a seasoning period. The banks want you to own the property for 6 months so they can allow you to refinance. I'll explain more in detail in the second example. After 6 months, you go to a bank or a financial institution. They check your credit. They say, we're going to give you, Mr. Christian, we're going to give you $300,000 times 80%. We're going to give you $240,000. How much do you want? And you're like, well, I want all $240,000. So now the bank writes a mortgage for $240,000, and they ask you, do you owe any money to anyone for that property? And you say, yeah, I own the hard money lender $220,000. So they give him the $220,000, and they send to your bank account $20,000 to make the whole $240 mortgage that you're going to be paying for the next 240 years. Second version of this, which is more complicated and more realistic, of course, when you close on the property for $220,000, the hard money lender will charge you generally 2 points up front. 2 points means 2% of the loan. The loan is $220,000, so he will charge you $4,400 immediately, and then he's going to charge you 1% per month. 1% per month on $220,000 is $2,200 a month. Now 6 months later, $2,200 a month is $13,200 plus the $4,400 from the 2 points. So you're gonna pay the hard money lender $17,600. Not only this, but you will have to pay closing costs. Let's say 1st of January, the hard money lender gives you the money. You have to pay closing costs. Let's call it $10,000 because it varies quite a lot depending on what state, but let's call it $10,000. So now the hard money lender doesn't give you $220,000. He gives you $215,600 because he deducted 2 points the day he gives you the money. He takes back $4,400. Plus you got to bring $10,000 to closing. So you have to actually come up with $14,400 at the day of closing on 1st of January. Now go 6 months later. Let's say this hard money lender, there's 2 options. He can ask for monthly payments of that $220, that is 1% per month, or he can ask you 6 months later when you refinance the property for you to pay him the full amount, which in this case is $13,200. I hope you're following me this far. So either monthly payments to the hard money lender or a lump sum when you refi the property 6 months down the road. All right, the third example is pretty complicated. So if you're not advanced, you can still watch it, but when you become more familiarized with the whole process, then you can come watch it and fully understand it. We're gonna go with almost the same example. In this example, you are going to ask the lender to give you the full $220,000 to fund the deal. But you ask him to fund both of your closing costs as well. I know, it's impossible, you might say, but if Internet Explorer has the courage to ask you to be your default web browser, you can have the courage to ask your lender to cover all of your closing costs and all of your fees. So this works only if the deal has a huge spread, and you're gonna see that into the example. Most likely, if it's your first deal with that lender, they will not do such a thing. I'd say realistically, they might fund 75 to 80% of your first deal with them. And when time goes by and you have more deals with them and the relationship grows, then they might fund everything. They might give you preferential cost of cash or points or other perks because they trust you that you're going to deliver. How I know that? I know it because I have a lender like that funded 2 of my deals, which I want to tell you about at the end of this video. Now let's run the numbers. $220,000 purchase price. The house this time appraises for $320,000. Like I said, you're going to need a bigger spread. We asked the lender for $250K. Why $250K? Well, we do have 2 closings that are $10,000 each, plus we do have $5,000 in points. As we discussed before, 2% of the loan is given back to the lender immediately. And after 6 months, when we refinance, we want him to cover everything. We'll have to pay APR, which is 12% per year on the money that we borrowed. For 6 months, it comes 12%. For 12 months is the same as 1% per month. So after 6 months, when we refinance, we have to pay 6% of $250K that we borrowed. So we want him to cover that as well. Okay, lender gives me $250 minus $5,000 for the 2 points up front. So all in all, I received $245 in our imaginary bank account. We purchased the house for $220 and we paid $10,000 closing cost, which leaves us with $15,000 in the bank account. After 6 months, we go to the bank, and again, the bank appraises the house. This time they say it's worth $320,000 and will give us 80% LTV or loan to value. That is $260,000. So the bank will give us $10,000 more than what we owe to the lender. If you remember, we owe the lender $250. We make another closing that is $10,000 and our bank account is left with $5,000. But we have to pay the 12% per year cost of cash or 1% per month. As I said before, that comes down to 6% for 6 months, which is $15,000. So in total, in this moment, we owe $250 to the lender, which is our original loan, plus $15,000 for the cost of cash for the 6 months that we use the cash for. So total, we need to come up with $265. That's great because we got $5,000 in the bank account, plus the bank will write us a mortgage for $260. And when you combine those two, we get $265 exactly. Basically, after that, we end up spending 0 cash and we end up having 0 cash made or lost, but we end up having an asset that is worth $320,000. But what is the downside? Well, first of all, we have a significantly higher mortgage of $265 in this third example. And deals like that don't come by very, very often. Although I've managed to find a few of those deals. The pros are you never have to spend any money out of pocket during the whole process. When you find the deal, when you fund the deal, when you close the first time, close the second time, you don't have to spend $1 out of your cash. You don't have to have any money on your disposal. In the second example, however, we had to have around $15,000 on hand to do the deal, even if at the end we actually ended up leaving only $4,400 into the deal. We still had to find $15,000 to have on our disposal to do one of the closings, but at the end we did get about $10,000 back. However, like I said, the downfall is that you have to have some funds available. The pros are that the mortgage amount was way lower at $220,000 on our second example. And for my personal deals, I got 2 duplexes that I purchased, $185,000 purchase price each. Final mortgage amount is $220,000. As you can see, it's $35,000 more than my purchase price. And that is because I wrapped all of the closing costs and fees for the lender inside of that loan. And each duplex is worth $300,000 right now. I didn't have to have any closing cost money during the whole process. However, I did end up having to bring around $1,500 per duplex closing cost at the end, and that was my out-of-pocket total cost. So all in all, for $3,000, I got $600,000 worth of real estate. That currently brings me a gross rent of $5,000. So in about 2 months, I got my money back. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Come and rewatch this video if you're not on the advanced level and you couldn't really follow the math. I swear later on it will make sense. Don't forget that the goal of this channel is to show you that the goal is not to look rich, but to be rich. Peace.